Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today I'm joined by Clive Lloyd, psychologist, principal consultant with GIST, and author of the #1 bestseller, Next Generation Safety Leadership from Compliance to Care. Clive's work focuses on helping organizations evolve their safety culture through psychological safety, with a particular emphasis on building trust. And in our conversation today, we unpack what trust really means in a health and safety context, why it's often missing, and how leaders can create the conditions where people feel safe to speak up, share concerns, and take ownership. Whether you're a safety professional, a senior leader, or anyone interested in creating high-performing, resilient teams, you'll get practical insights you can apply straight away. So let's dive in. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Clive.
You're really welcome. Thanks for the invite, Christian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, early morning for me, afternoon for you.
Yeah, afternoon tea time. I've got that cup of, some would say beer o'clock, but cup of tea this time in the afternoon.
First coffee of the day for me. But we've got an exciting topic to talk about, so I don't need any coffee for this. Just your dulcet tones.
Well, look, I think it's exciting. I'm hoping other people do.
Well, it's definitely important. So, important. Exciting, important. All of these words are relevant, I think. But I thought we'd start, Clive, by just talking a bit about. You mentioned kind of what got you interested in or passionate about safety, and I think it was talking to a group of big tough miners. Do you want us to tell that story?
Yeah, look, that's one of those moments, Christian, that is etched in my mind. Look, safety really wasn't a plan for me. As a psychologist, my background is more clinical and counselling psychology.
Yeah.
But for one reason or another, I'd sort of got a lot of experience in grief counselling, which I think, again, was a legacy of my work in the field of the addictions. Unfortunately, addictions and fatalities do go together.
Yeah.
And so I'd picked up quite a lot of experience in grief counselling. And so when I started my private practice, it didn't take long before I got my first phone call from a mine site. And essentially, like an EAP provider, what they wanted me to do was to go to a mine site and to do some counselling after a fatality at that workplace. And again, never forget it. They'd already kicked it off. The GM, general manager of that mine site, they ushered me into his office, and in the office was the GM, and from memory there was 4 miners, all colleagues of the deceased.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, there's something gut-wrenching, mate, about seeing a group of big, tough, hairy miners sitting there trying to choke back sobs, and they really weren't successful in choking them back. They were just sobbing.
Yeah.
And again, the other thing that struck me and I think got me really curious about safety, and at this stage it was purely in the mining industry, the GM was patently not used to those events, and certainly not equipped to, I believe, to engage those people in that level of grief. And he was saying things like, we keep telling people there's no need to rush and you can stop a job whenever you like, and almost a defensive approach.
Very defensive.
Very defensive. And these guys were just sobbing and staring at the ground. And so, all I said at that moment was, guys, what is it you need right now? And they just looked up straight away. And one of them said, I just want to go home. My wife knows the wife of their colleague. She'll just want to go and check on her. I just want to. And the other ones then joined in and they explained what they needed. The GM, I think, then picking up on where I was heading with that, said, totally understandable, do what you need to do. Let us know if there's anything you need in the meantime. But, for me, after doing a lot of grief counselling, it's something about those big, tough, hairy guys sobbing that really hit home. So that was my introduction, Christian. That was my
Hmm.
introduction to health and safety, and that one really. And there was many more after that.
Yeah.
That's kind of what led me
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The first one is often it often sticks with you, doesn't it? The first kind of experience that you have in
Absolutely.
any field, especially if it's kind of a very emotive one like that.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Clive. I thought today we would talk a bit about trust, because I know that's a topic that you're interested in, and one that I'm very interested in as well. And people have different
Mm,
approaches to trust.
mm.
You've talked about trust as the currency of leadership in safety. What do you mean by that? And I guess philosophically, and maybe also in practical terms.
Yeah, sure. So currency of trust, I'll come to that. Clearly, you've been reading, Chris. Good on you. Good on you. Yeah, look, trust. My focus on trust came from a couple of areas, but after those events, such as the one I've just described with the mining company and many more fatalities, it did get me wondering. Well, what are these companies doing the other end? That is, what are they doing to prevent harm? Or if they can't prevent all harm, at least what are they
Yeah,
doing to prevent fatalities? And look, as a psychologist, and that's been my background for 30 odd years, some of the things I'd seen around the high risk areas psychologically didn't seem to fit very well in terms of the goals that they had, keeping their people safe. And so I really started looking at the research. Again, the meetings, the post-fatality grief counselling I was doing, they can take an emotional toll.
yeah,
And that drove me to look at, well, what does work? And the more I looked, I was particularly interested in high reliability organizing. There's quite a lot of psychology in that background. But all I could find as a consistent predictor of less incidents was trust. It kept coming back to that.
hmm.
And so I started having a look at that. Then, if you break down that research, the main researches that people seem to be looking at and using to measure trust was from Roger Meyer et al. That was back in 1995 and revisited in the early 2000s. And they broke down trust into three core factors. And those three core factors were integrity, probably no surprise there. Also, though, competence or ability. And then the third factor is what the academics called benevolence, or essentially demonstrated care. And so the more I looked at those three variables, that trust factor really stood out. That care factor really stood out. And
Yeah,
again, that's true of the research. If you look at Natalie Abioden's research from a couple of years ago, when it comes to building trust or overcoming mistrust, while all three of those factors are important and vital indeed, the one that stands out as the stronger predictor of building and overcoming, or building trust and overcoming mistrust, is that care factor.
yeah,
And so that's sort of led to the focus. So when I talked in my book about the the currency of leadership, it's like what we can invest in. A currency is something you can save, it's something you can spend, it's something you can accrue. And for me, one of the best things we can do or invest in as a currency is by building trust. The more trust we have in the trust bank, as it were, the better it's going to be for us and our team. We can also have a trust debt. And I think there are some things we can do that cause us a bit of a trust tax. And we
right.
can leak trust all over the place and we have to pay the tax many times. We might touch on that. But yeah, I see it very much as the tax. If you don't have trust, you lose capital as a leader in order to be able to do things and change things, which of course is really important for leaders.
Yeah, yeah. And it strikes me that of those three factors, integrity, competence, and care, to use the simple terms, health and safety professionals probably would feel as if, you know, they've got the integrity, they've got the competence, and of course we care. But I suppose it's
Yeah.
maybe that third one is where we would be, I don't want to use the word lacking, but that's the one maybe that we aren't as well trained for, we aren't as well set up for success in.
Yeah,
Is that kind of fair
it is, mate. And
summarization?
a lot of people listen, they hear me talk about the care factor. Well, of course we care. They think we're talking about we need to care more. No, that's not what we're saying at all. We're looking at the care factor there just as one of those three factors that are required to create trust, or more importantly, often in the organizations we work in, to overcome mistrust. And I think you're right. I think most leaders actually do care.
Yeah.
That's my experience. Leaders
Mm.
care about their people. I don't know too many leaders. I've met a couple though. I
Yeah.
haven't met too many who don't care or don't care whether they get hurt. Of course they do. But here's an example. I've done this in every leadership group I've been in. Two simple questions. And I get them to put their hands up if they believe that leaders in their organization actually do care about their teams. Now, of course, as we're saying, invariably, most hands, often all hands will go up.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask, all right, tell me, put your hand up again if you believe leaders here are good at demonstrating care to their teams. And that's often a different story. Often no hands go up. And so, look, we just explore that. Now, you could argue that it should be enough just to care. But again, it's kind of not. If we're not actually demonstrating care in ways, well, how would our teams actually know?
Yeah.
And so demonstrate it becomes important. And don't get me wrong, we're pragmatic. I'm not talking now about, you just have to run around hugging people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's not what we're talking about. But we have to work out in our reward systems, in our recognition systems, just the way that we work, the way that we lead, how we can actually demonstrate that we do care for people. And sometimes that's not as simple as it sounds. And there are personality variables here. Some people just naturally appear to be very good at demonstrating care, whether you refer to that as EQ or people skills. So there are variations there, but nevertheless, there are some things that we can do as leaders just to get more certain that our teams will feel like they are genuinely cared about, and it makes a stunning difference.
Yeah. Yeah. We won't go into a therapy session for me, but I've done a bit of talking therapy with some childhood stuff, as many people do, and that sort of feeling of being cared for it is so crucial. But it's something that I definitely care, but I probably feel as if I'm not quite sometimes as good as demonstrating that I care as I could be. So that's something I'm actually working on, and part of that is some of the things that I've had in the past.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And look, we're a team of psychologists, and we're incredibly mindful that we need to practice what we preach. And we all get busy and we all get stressed. And those are the times, it can elude us and we can get quite brusque in our communication.
Mm.
We can get our buttons pushed and react rather than respond. So, I mean, I'm blessed that I work in a team full of psychologists. So everybody's got the skill sets behind them as well as naturally being caring people.
Yeah.
But it's not across the board. And again, we don't do this because it's nice. Or I remember when I first had started the work that we've been describing, some research came out through ANU here in Australia, the Australian National University, in the mining industry. And one of the concluding paragraphs of that study was unless the mistrust of the workforce can be overcome, even the most sophisticated and well-intended management initiatives will be treated with cynicism and undermined. And
Mm.
that was exactly the experience that I'd had, where events like I've described, there's a fatality. So what does a reactive culture do? Well, they react. They'll bring in, I don't know, BBS program, or these days probably more likely a hot program, and put their workforce and leaders through that, expecting that's going to make the difference. But the big but here is unless they have first overcome that mistrust, it's very unlikely even worthy, sophisticated interventions will gain any traction.
Yeah.
So for me, that's the starting point. If you've overcome those pockets or maybe even wider mistrust, then I think any good quality intervention is more likely to gain traction. But it just doesn't tend to happen without trust.
Right. So if there is that kind of sense of mistrust, what are some of the things that can be done to overcome that? Is it about maybe consistency, for example, perhaps
Yeah.
there are times when people feel like that, there is more trust and then it sort of peters out, or
Yeah.
what are some of the factors that you found that work?
Well, again, I'll go back at a broad level to those three core
Yeah.
factors from the research. So, integrity, no surprise there. We can say, we can have the big signs out the front, zero harm, well, your safety is our highest priority. But if we're not walking that talk, if the teams there's incongruity between our words and our actions,
Yeah.
well, then integrity comes down. That's not going to do it. So we have to do what we said we were going to do. We need to
Hmm.
walk the talk. These are the fundamentals. Then there's competence. Again, as leaders, we need to be good at least what we're supposed to be good at. Don't have to be good at everything. And so if the workforce get a sense that leadership just have no idea what they're doing, they lack that level of confidence in their leaders, it's going to be difficult. So we need to demonstrate that. Then again, of course, there's that third factor, the care factor. You do need all three. I
Yeah.
can start leading with integrity. I can be highly competent. But again, if my team simply perceive I don't give a shit about them, well,
Yeah.
trust remains elusive. Now, equally, I can care deeply for my people and even demonstrate it and be highly competent. But again, if I operate with a lack of integrity, it's not going to happen. So those three factors are a good guide.
Yeah.
So again, we need often to become, I believe, a little bit more authentic in our claims, especially around health and safety. And I did write in the book, there's some really well-intended interventions that many high-risk organizations engage in that can often backfire. Even
Mm.
if you go, even right down to things like zero harm, which again, I think is a noble intention.
Yeah.
Um, but again, and I was speaking about this at a conference recently, there is an incident, but we bring that person back on light duties purely for reasons of metrics, purely so that doesn't count as a lost time injury.
Yeah.
Well, the workforce sees then, there's a lack of integrity in that
Yeah.
process. So
Yeah.
I think we need to be really authentic in our claims and just speak in language that you don't need the hyperbole, you don't need the big claims. It's
No.
just about, for me, and I know you're a big advocate of it's for me, it's about risk. It's about identifying and managing risk in a really proactive way.
Mm.
And I think the more we can do that authentically with our people, so they feel trusting enough to speak up, and that's where the goal is for me. It's difficult to create that when people are still fearful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said, what was it? You can't fix a secret. Was that the expression that you've used before?
Yeah.
That, you've got to have that psychological safety that they feel they can speak up. Otherwise, things are going to be hidden. And, even if you're well-meaning and even if you do care and you're demonstrating your care and even if you're competent, if you still haven't quite done enough and things are being hidden from you, then, well, not hidden, but, things aren't being told to you, then you can't do anything about that anyway, can you?
That's exactly right. And again, if you look at high reliability organizing, even though often these are military, things like nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers, I think most people know that story of the Carl Vinson aircraft carrier where a young crewman had lost a tool, went straight to the deck boss and said, "I've lost the tool." And they shut the entire vessel down, which is, no small thing. But that young guy that lost the tool received a commendation, not for losing his tool, of course,
No.
but he got a commendation for immediately reporting it.
Mm.
And in high risk situations, you absolutely have to have people not guessing, not wondering if it's safe to report, but absolutely knowing it's safe. And that
Mm.
was the thing that struck me about high reliability organizing. They've got all the technical principles down, but at the heart of all of that is people know it's absolutely safe to report.
Yeah.
And that just struck me, and it's all the way through, not just with
Mm.
physical safety, but now the push towards psychosocial safety.
Yeah.
Um, the same applies to that field too.
Yeah. How well people, just on a slight tangent, doing it at, morphing our approach to that. Physical safety obviously has been around for a long time.
Yeah,
Now, and we're more and more seeing um, additional things being put onto the plate of health and safety, including mental health and so on.
Yeah.
How well are we doing at sort of moving along with that
Um,
trend?
Look, it varies. I would say overall, there's a little bit of fear around, a little bit of concern, because to me, the psychosocial element has been dumped firmly in the lap of HSC practitioners. Not
Yeah,
not everywhere, but a lot of people have done that.
yeah,
And again, I'm not sure that's fair, frankly. I'm not sure that's fair at all. And so there is a big transition here in Australia. I'm not quite sure, Christian, where you're at in the UK, but there is actually now, um, regulatory compliance mandated here. And so people have to
right.
get up to speed pretty quickly with that.
Mm,
And so increasingly, well, in our organization, we've got the three key pillars, which is the sort of health and safety. Then we've got the psychosocial safety, and then we've got the sort of leadership that goes behind that. And we're getting pretty busy now with that psychosocial space. Now,
yeah,
again, some of there's the overlapping. Again, psychosocial safety begins with trust.
yeah.
We need people to be safe to speak up. You could say there's overlap there with psychological safety, and that's
Hmm.
one of the issues. We're getting a lot of people who get mixed up with those two things. I wish they'd
Yeah,
called it something else right now.
yeah.
Psychological safety, psychosocial safety,
Hmm.
different things. There is overlap, but there's different things. So there's quite a bit of confusion out there. And I think what many are trying to do is to expand their current health and safety reporting systems to put their psychosocial hazards within that and operate in similar ways.
Mm,
I'm not sure how successful that's going to be. The last thing I'd want to see is psychosocial safety mirrors what we did with health and safety. We make things a tick box, you know.
yeah.
We do take fives for psychosocial risks and so forth.
Mm,
I hope we don't go down that path,
yeah.
but organisations are seeking a lot of clarity, and so that's
Mm,
keeping us right now.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think the difficulty there is that, and going back to an earlier thread, everybody's different. And so it's very hard in that space to be ticking boxes, um, a, a a message that you put out there and communicate something to me, might land totally differently to someone else. And my feelings about things are totally different to someone else's. And so it can't be broad brush. I think it needs to be very bespoke, doesn't it, there?
It really does. And again, I wrote an article a little while ago about this. My concern about dumping it with HSC and or HR actually, HR are the
Mm,
other ones who are copying a lot of this, is to me, psychosocial safety really begins in the boardroom.
yeah.
Again, because if you've got executives who say the way they're looking about hitting production targets, looking after their stakeholders, and they have every right to do that as directors. But if they put in place, for example, a reward system that involves people, their workload shooting up, or if their metrics drive behaviors that may be even dubious ethically and
Mm,
so forth, well, you can kind of forget the nice fruit bowl on the table. Or the yoga lessons, or none of that's going to improve psychosocial safety if the board haven't really grabbed this for themselves. So increasingly find working at the board level first, getting that buy-in is absolutely essential. This is not just an HSC, this is not just an HR function, this is a whole of leadership approach. And if it doesn't start in the boardroom, my concern is it won't really, again, gain much traction and we'll keep chasing our tails.
yeah, yeah. I find that I was having this conversation actually in the last couple of days. I find that typically, if you are in the boardroom, there is that level of care. Whether they're demonstrating is maybe another question, but there is that level of care, and obviously at the sort of shop floor level, of course, there is that level of care, and it sort of tends to get lost in the middle because we start to look at things like P&Ls and KPIs, and
Exactly.
the organization becomes very driven by metrics and numbers, and we kind of lose that that level of care. Does that echo sort of anything you've seen before?
It really does, and both in traditional health and safety and also psychosocial safety.
Yeah.
Since I started working in the health and safety field some again, 25, metrics have not been an area that I've seen really have helped much. I think they've been intended to do that. There's the old adage that, you can't sort of measure what you can't manage,
Yeah.
the other way around. But I've found, it's more about what you measure can get manipulated in safety.
Yeah.
And most people who've worked in the field would know exactly what we're talking about here. And my
Yeah.
fear is that if the metrics are not well thought through, then we could get a fair few Cobra effects happening. If you're familiar with the Cobra effect, Christian, or the law of perverse incentives, where
Yeah.
sometimes, we end up with the very things we don't want if the metrics aren't thought through well.
Mm. Yeah. I was going to ask you about metrics actually, in terms of going back to trust. Is there a way of measuring, of quantifying trust in any way, shape, or form? And if there is, bearing in mind what you've just said, is that something we should be doing or not?
Absolutely. In fact, that's usually our starting point with clients. And you'd be familiar with Diane Chadwick-Jones. Yeah, actually, you had
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
on one of your podcasts.
I
I
did.
listened
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
that. It was great.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a big fan of Diane's work. And I remember speaking a couple of years ago. We were both in Berlin at the conference there. And during a time with BP, most large organizations do their annual surveys, engagement surveys, climate surveys. And you may recall Diane sharing this, but she'd look at the survey results, and there was always this small pocket of survey items that predicted safety performance and safety culture better than kind of the overall survey. And invariably, those items were trust-based. They were
Mm.
tapping into the trust. And by all means, sort of have a wider look at measurement. But if you want a good, reliable predictor of culture, but also safety performance. This would also include, I believe, psychosocial safety performance. Then measuring trust is probably the best starting point. So that is
Right.
what we do. So we've got, again, a reliable and valid measure. Much of it based on the prior work of Mayer et al. From 1995. But we've got a trust measure that really taps into those three core factors. Plus a few extra items that actually measure or assess the key elements of psychological safety. That will give us a really clear picture in
Right.
terms of the overall, how trust is perceived by the workforce. That
Yeah.
is then taking that data. That's usually how we then assist that organization to design their intervention. None of our programs are off the shelf. They're usually done, they're all bespoke, but usually based on data that we've collected with the client or from the client.
Right. And is that with like surveys, like or is it with interviews, like primary research? How do you sort of achieve
So
get the data?
we've got a and actually, when is this going to air? Because we're just updating the website. If it's in 2 or 3 weeks, it'll be
Yeah.
absolutely current.
Oh, perfect. Well,
So
it'll be about then. So yeah.
yeah, so if people go to our website and look at the culture scan element, and this is across those three pillars: health and safety, psychosocial safety, and leadership. We've got a range of different surveys. One of them is purely in terms of quantitative data, and that's really the reliability and valid sort of trust survey per se. But then we've got the more the cultural assessment, which is a mixture of quantitative, but also the qualitative. So they're often done through semi-structured interviews,
Yeah.
one-on-ones, plus often the workforce in small groups. And often it's those qualitative culture assessments that give the story behind the metrics. The metrics are
Yeah.
good, but it's for me at least, it's those qualitative stories that really point to why those scores are saying what they are saying. And
Right.
so then we'll combine the quantitative and the qualitative. We've usually got a pretty clear picture there of where we need to go to next.
Hmm. Okay. And what would be some of the warning signs, that trust is maybe eroding in an organization's culture?
Yeah, and often they're to do with, again, if we go to the psychological safety elements, is where teams broadly report it doesn't feel safe to
Right.
speak up.
Okay.
It doesn't feel safe to share ideas. And again, once you've got, not everyone, of course, but where there's more of those responses than those people that do feel relatively safe to speak up, that's a bit of a red flag. Now, what's interesting is that can differ from team to team within the same business unit or within the same organization. And again, to mirror Amy Edmondson's research, what we've learned over the years is that psychological safety is leader dependent. And that even in one organization, you have some leaders who've been able to create that climate where psychological safety can emerge and then thrive. And then others who apparently can't or won't or don't understand how to do that. And that's not said with blame. So we don't know what we don't know. And some people are just unsure as to why they can't seem to create this climate. And so it's not about going in there with a big stick, but if, again, you can't fix a secret. If we understand why some teams are thriving and others aren't, it helps us to co-design with clients strategies to actually plug those gaps. Sometimes there's skill gaps, other times they're cultural gaps, and other times it's the boardroom that have actually got the work to do, and so forth. But yeah, so for me, some of the biggest red flags involve people not being feeling safe to, whether it's health and safety report incidents or near misses, but also to share ideas.
Yeah.
When people stop sharing because they're fearful of being, criticized or put down and so forth. Those would be some key indicators.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like we've got to, at all costs, kind of avoid this them and us situation. Then we've got to be, it's got to be us, not them and us.
Absolutely. And look, I wrote an article today about contractors, slightly tangential here, Christian, bear with me, but in those early days of attending those post-fatality counselling sessions, 4 out of 5 of those fatalities were contractors.
Right.
And that still sticks with me again. And there's reasons for that. But what I noticed, and back then, 25 years ago, I was relatively new to mining and construction, but historically have a lot of contractors. They're contractor heavy. But I noticed straight away contractors were viewed as them. They were treated differently because they were contractors. And that us versus them was absolutely rife. And so that alone is a red flag for psychological safety, also health and safety. Because again, often it's contractors that have the most nervousness about keeping employment.
Yeah.
And at least here in Australia, say in construction, one of the ways a client might decide which contractor to use is often based on their lost time injury rate, or their TRIFR. And sometimes that's within a few decimal points, And so, hey, if you're a contracting company wanting to get a big job with clients, here's the Cobra effect again. What could that do? It could encourage us to keep that TRIFR nice and low. And so psychologically, how does that play out? Well, we get that when people actually do report an incident, come on, really? You're going to report that? That's going to bring the TRIFR down. We're bidding for this big job. And so these all have big knock-on effects. It was no surprise to me that most of those fatalities were happening in those organizations, many contracting organizations, many of whom were terrified if their TRIFR ticked over a certain rate, because they knew that would largely exclude them from bidding for large jobs. It's pretty toxic stuff. And I'm sure you're aware of the clear research these days that shows that TRIFR is not a good indicator.
No.
It's not a good metric of safety anyway. But it's still in the mix there when people are looking to hire contracting companies.
Well, that's No, it's a great point, and it's because procurement people don't really understand any of this stuff, do they? So they're just looking at, well, what's an easy thing we can measure, and that'll do. That'll tell us if they're safe or not.
That's right.
Yeah, very, very high level, no real thought, and perpetuating the issue, sadly. So yeah, lots of work for us to do to educate these bigger organizations in terms of how they should be going about choosing their contractors, because it's definitely a big area, and certainly here in the UK, I think most large organizations are pretty good at a lot of this stuff. But it's hard if if you're an SME, you don't have a dedicated health and safety person. You definitely don't have a dedicated person thinking about psychosocial safety, so you don't have the resources. So it is more difficult in these smaller organizations.
Absolutely.
So if we've got to the point where something has happened, like that major incident that fatality that we started with today, how do we go about trying to repair trust once it's been not lost but maybe damaged or tarnished?
Yeah, and another quote from the book, or, the old Dutch proverb, "Trust arrives on foot, lives on horseback." And
Yeah.
so, look, it can take a while, but again, there are things that leaders can do to to assist at least the process of regaining trust or overcoming mistrust. Again, if we go back to the three-factor model, the strongest predictor of overcoming mistrust is again that demonstrated care or
Yeah.
benevolence. I'm a big fan here of Decker's work when he talked about the just, or actually a restorative culture, because
Hmm.
I was going to say just culture model, but that gets misinterpreted too.
Yeah.
But the difference between, again, the retributive approach after an incident versus the restorative. And for me, the companies, this, by the way, is a shortcut. We've been measuring safety climate or safety culture for 20 odd years. A shortcut, as well as assessing trust, is looking at how organizations do respond after an incident. That to me is the biggest tell of their overall cultural maturity, how they
Right.
respond after an incident. And again, Decker would suggest, and I would agree, that the less mature organizations, they tend to go with the retribution first.
Mm.
That is, who's to blame? Whose fault was that? Who's to blame? What should the punishment be? Now, if you're trying to overcome mistrust, that's the last thing we should be doing.
Yeah.
There's time for learning, of course there is. And the more restorative cultures would, and this is probably more in the high reliability organizing approach, is first and foremost, after an incident or after an injury, the people directly or indirectly affected by that incident, have they got everything they need? Have we provided care, in other words, to the primary and the secondary victims? Whose responsibility is that? Are we all over that? Now, once we're sure that we've done that, then yes, then we can learn. But we're not,
Mm.
again, going to go directly to whose fault is it. It's going to be more about what happened. I guess there's overlap here with HOP, right? The principles we can
Yeah.
blame or we can, for sure. And that's why I think some of the HOP principles, they can actually help to, if we can remember them when we're stressed out because our LTI rate just shot up,
Yeah.
um, and we're looking for blood. Um, if we can just remember what happened as opposed to who did this. So one of the biggest indicators for me, Christian, is how we respond after that incident. Is it more
Yeah.
restorative or is it more retributive?
Mm. Yeah.
Not that HOP's the magic wand here, but that's one area that I think it's very useful as an approach.
Yeah. And I think that in a moment of uh, crisis or in a moment of stress, that's where actually, if you just think about your own um, uh, personal personality. But yeah, the way we act in moments of stress or moments of high pressure is kind of reflective of probably a truer reflection of who we are and what we're all about than when times are easy, isn't it? So I suppose there's an analogy there for something terrible's happened, right? How are we going to respond? And
Yeah.
that's a better reflection of who we are as an organization.
Absolutely. And look, I do, when I'm working with organizations and leaders, I do, even though it sounds very simple, I do talk a lot about pausing before we react. Because what I know is if we don't pause, particularly after an event that's been pretty stressful, the odds are we are going to react. And when we do that, it's likely to be with a pointed finger.
Yeah.
That's almost human nature. I think it is human nature to blame. It's all right to say, you know, blame doesn't fix anything. Probably doesn't, but we will all do it. We do all do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't, I agree, it doesn't fix anything, but it's quite natural human nature.
Yeah.
But again, human nature. You could argue going to the bathroom in your pants is human nature, but most of us seem to evolve past that one.
Yeah.
And again, the more we learn to pause, both individually, but also collectively as a leadership team after an event, pause long enough to put the pointed fingers away and to actually get really conscious in the types of questions that we ask. And that is part of the competence, those three factors
Yeah.
again. I think leadership competence is a big competency in health and safety is mature leadership is pausing long enough to ask effective questions rather than reacting.
Yeah. It's a great piece of advice there, Clive. Last couple of questions from me before we wrap it up. What's the most powerful trust building moment that you've ever witnessed in a safety or a leadership? I suppose let's have a safety context. What's something that you've seen happen that's been really
Mm.
powerful?
And look, some of them weren't necessarily in the moment dramatic, but some of them
Yeah.
have a cumulative effect. For example, in the book, I mentioned John Phillips, one of my favorite safety leaders, but actually one of my favorite leaders. And he always used to take that opportunity. In the book I write, he just opened one of our programs, but in a coffee break, we were just outside, and it's a construction, one of their construction sites. And he noticed a new guy, and he went straight up to him and said, "I'm John. I'm the safety manager. I see you're new here." Got chatting, and yeah, he said, "So what's your role on the team?" And he said, the young guy said, "I'm just a spotter." Now, I think great leaders pick up on language. They're aware of the
Yeah.
power of language. And so John was able, through a few questions and conversations, to help that young guy to reframe. He's not just a spotter. He's looking after the safety of his team and so forth.
Yeah.
He spent 5 or 10 minutes with that guy, young guy. But again, what he did in that moment was make that guy feel really safe, knowing it's absolutely safe to speak up to John and the team, builds self-esteem around that guy. And I think that's what great leaders do. And
Mm.
so they don't necessarily do it in massive dramatic moments, but they do it continually, and they do it, and that just builds over time. I have seen some really outstanding leaders, though, in dramatic moments. I won't name names here, but again, after fatalities, I've seen leaders deal brilliantly with those and some not so brilliantly. And so for me, there's the recognition amongst Peter is his name, not a fatality, but a serious injury.
Hmm.
And they've taken really good care of the guy. They've phoned his wife. They've sort of got coaching for here, but he actually brought the immediate team in and explained without defensiveness exactly what he understood had happened. And again, he just asked that work team, what did they need right now? No attempt to apportion blame or dismiss blame of self, just what actually happened and what they all need right now. And I remember talking to some of those team members later on, and they just really, that stuck with them too, is that they
Mm.
were brought into the conversation and asked what they need. Now, this isn't mind-blowing stuff necessarily,
No.
but again, it's that restorative approach. Um, and again, in those moments, we're teaching people that they're valued, their voices are
Yeah.
valued. We want to hear those. So for me, rather than huge dramatic moments, it's more incremental change through consistent actions.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And if someone who's joining us today was inspired by what we've spoken about today, and they wanted to take just one kind of trust focused action over the next week or the next 2 weeks, uh, what should they do? What should that action be?
For me, and this is something I try to model within our own team, and our MD also does a good job of this. I create time, and I believe it's factored in regularly to the way that we do work. It's not a one and done, and that is we actually find time that's purely for the team to share how things are.
Yeah.
Not necessarily positive or negative, but I will actually schedule in time. for people to just let me know what their experience of work is right now. And for me, it's not about positive or negative or solving challenges. I just want to hear. Now, again, how leaders respond matters, to use another hot principle. I'm going to hear without judgment. That's something I'm going to pride myself on doing. I'm not going to try and solve issues or solve problems. I'd like actually to work through together. But I believe in doing that regularly, that we teach each other as an organization that all of our voices are really important. They matter. Safe to share ideas. And we're better because of it. We get some amazing ideas coming through the team.
Yeah.
Nothing's off limits. It's all safe. And so not just, a lot of people would say just listening is a great leadership thing to do. Active listening has been talked about for decades. Of course it is. But we need to create the space for people to do that. Otherwise, we all get busy, we forget that stuff. So for me, to summarize, creating a regular time for my people to speak and be really heard. Yeah.
Great tip. Thank you so much, Clive. Really, really interesting, enjoyable. Going back to what we said at the start, really lots of value there as well. So thank you so much. If people, other than taking away that tip, have found this useful, got any other resources or things to do, and how should they connect with you, and so on? The floor is yours to plug away.
Sure. Well, LinkedIn, Christian, I think that's where you and I first met. So just Clive Lloyd on LinkedIn. Our company page is GYST, GYST. But look, probably if you want a deeper dive into those 3 pillars that we work with, health and safety, psychosocial safety, what we call 3C leadership, go to the website, which is just gistconsulting.com.au. It's in the middle of an upgrade. So by the time this goes to air, Christian, I think it'll be nicely up and ready. It should be very current. If people want a deeper dive into what you and I have been speaking specifically about here, which is trust, my book is probably a really good place to start.
Yeah, we'll include the link for the book in the show notes. Good stuff. All right. Thanks a lot, Clive. Have a good evening, and I'm going to start my day.
Get into that coffee, Christian. It's still early there. I appreciate you taking the time.
Will do. Many thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.